Michael Massa. Catch the white man, catch the devil, the battle cry of NVITA NKANGA. Story, history. Remember the great sacrifice of our glorious ancestors in October 1665, October 1921, and October 1951. The War of Mbwila or the Battle of Mbwila or Mpwila, Father Lobeladio, a Capuchin ordained in 1637, was a Catholic priest who was an ultra-nationalist Congo, a patriot who was involved in the defense of the unity of Congo Giantotella in the 17th century. Father Lobeladio in his sermon on Sundays urged the faithful to rise up against the Portuguese colonialist. His favorite slogan was, Nkangu Wamosi, Congo Daimosi, Ntainu Wamosi. Congo Dieto Bambuta Baisa Dieo. Father Lobeladio asked his followers to recite this slogan 3 times after Mass. In NVITA. In October 1665, Father Lobeladio took up arms and accompanied King NVITA NKANGA to the battlefield, in the Great War of Mbwila. On October 29, 1665, the Great War of Mbwila erupted for 9 hours without interruption. The Portuguese fired cannons continuously, facing the Bakongo armed with poisoned arrows. King NVITA NKANGA was seriously injured. He knew he was going to die and gave his will to Father Lobeladio, this valiant priest who accompanied this king to war for the glory and national unity of Congo. Covered in blood, King NVITA NKANGA suddenly rose up. Do not forget that to your ancestors, the great Mfumu wa Congo had said, Congo Tadi, Kabasui Mbasinga. 2. Thus, you will continue the war, O valiant son of Congo. You will continue the war until the total reunification of Congo. 3. Your war is the holy war of the national unity of the Congo and the integrity of its territory. 4. Congo Tadi, the sword of the sword, O valiant son of Congo. Kana wrapping Kia cookies. After these words, the great King NVITA NKANGA fell and gave up his soul. Meanwhile, the Portuguese army surrounded the king. A soldier cut off the head of the great King NVITA NKANGA. A heavy rain suddenly began to fall. Thunders rolled in the dark threatening clouds. Panicked, the Portuguese decided to withdraw and return to Luanda where their fortress was located. In Luanda, the Portuguese celebrate a Thanksgiving Mass to the ancestors of the whites called saints. Then, they bury the head of the great King NVITA NKANGA in the Church of Our Lady of Nazareth in Luanda. After the War of Mbwila, the Portuguese bring war to Mbanza Congo, which will no longer be inhabited and finally destroyed. Following the example of Father Lobeladio, Father Fulbert Yulu became involved in the liberation struggle of Congo-Brazza, while Father Loya played a leading role in the struggle of Abako for the independence of Belgian Congo. And what about the leading role of the great Ngunza, Kimbangu, Phili Mbumba, Matai Muanda, and Andre Matsua, in the destruction of the colonial regime in Central Africa from 1921 to 1951? In October 1921, Mfumu Kimbangu was sentenced to death at the military tribunal, General Darasi, of Mbanza and Gungu for saying 3 times no to the colonization of the land of Congo and all of Black Africa. Wait! Remember the great sacrifice of our glorious ancestors in October 1665, October 1921, and October 1951. In the year 1665, on the 25th day of the 10th month, at 1 o'clock in Congo, the battle was certainly raging, the adrenaline of the soldiers, excited by the war cry, Kanga Mundal, Kanga Ndoki, which would later be taken up by Kimpavita, being at its peak. The day before, a week before the Battle of Mbwila, which would become, centuries later, a historical reference for all fighters for the emancipation and prosperity of Congo, the War Council, chaired by Mwine NVITA NKANGA Antonio I, learned from its informants that the Portuguese had secretly brought in from Portugal, a few new pieces of artillery, 10 cannons in particular, in order to surpass the firepower of the royal armies. A month earlier, their own military command had also placed an order, for about 20 cannons and 100 rifles, with the Dutch, but the shipment, until the day of the War Council, had not yet arrived. His Majesty's Secret Services supposed that it was the Portuguese who must have convinced the Dutch not to deliver the goods. But, a week from the decisive day, there was no turning back. They had to go into confrontation. Because the Portuguese were not finished creating disorder in what remained of the empire at that date, by providing weapons and ammunition to the governors of certain provinces and the princes of certain secessionist kingdoms, wanting to secede to fully benefit from trade with the Mindels, that is, to hand over to the latter the management of the mines in their territories in exchange for strengthening their authorities within them. The War Council thus decided to maintain the declaration of war and the date of the confrontation, October 25, 1665, hoping that the brotherly kingdoms that had promised to ally with the troops of NVITA NKANGA would keep their word and above all that they would take the initiative to send troops and weapons to the military camps set up near the battlefield at Mbuila. 3 days before, the king and his closest lieutenants had left their families, embraced their wives and children, and given instructions to be executed in case of defeat, to leave NVITA NKANGA, the capital, taking with them the royal treasures and going into exile with the heir prince and his heirs, the queen and the other wives of the king as well as their servants, to the nephew of the king, queen of a kingdom that had declared itself neutral. The awaited day arrived. During the battle, the king was on the front line, surrounded by his most faithful and seasoned lieutenants. The ferocity of the young soldiers of Congo was only matched by the love for the fatherland reminded to them by their king whom they saw at work, spear in his left hand and royal saber, passed down from his father and from his predecessor, and which is in fact the one that the Ngangala Kong Onimi Olukini had forged with his own hands in ancient times of the unification of the peoples of Congo, in his right hand. The pressure on the opposing camp, the Portuguese allied with the dreadful Yaka warriors, was so powerful that they were about to call for troop withdrawal, but at that precise moment, a gunshot rang out, the projectile piercing NVITA NKANGA's chest, causing him to collapse, though he still had strength to defeat the 3 Portuguese soldiers who had taken him in a pincer movement. But with the king dead, the morale of the soldiers fled even though a few bold ones remained to defeat some Portuguese here and some Yakas there. Taking advantage of the sudden fatigue of the Congo soldiers, the Portuguese seized the body of NVITA NKANGA and beheaded him. They would go on to brandish, as a trophy, the king's head suspended from his majesty's spear, in the streets of Mbanza Congo that a few intrepid souls had decided not to abandon. The defeat of Mbuila and the sacrifice of NVITA NKANGA remain engraved in the memory of those who, throughout the world, aspire and work for the birth of a great Congolese nation. Kimpa Vita, with her Antonian movement, and all the posterity she has aroused, fit into this perspective. Even though today it is no longer strictly a matter of speaking of the restoration of the Congo Empire since, henceforth, in the name Congolese recognize peoples who were not part of the former Congo society, which was already very heterogeneous. But, finally, the word belongs to the valiant warrior NVITA NKANGA who, collapsing on that fateful day of October 25, 1665, exclaimed, "United, Congo is an indestructible stone." This phrase makes perfect sense today as we stand on the brink of socio-political implosion in Kongo-Nsundi, Brazzaville. The serious crisis that prevails in our homeland does not pit people from the south against those from the north, it cannot be stressed enough. But it is the expression of what the last 4 decades of governance have been the worst thing we have been capable of after the defeat of Mbuila. May each one be the pebble that will make Congo the indestructible stone of Central Africa.